I am Patricia Bishop. I am the daughter of O.C. Barnes, who is the granddaughter of Siliconji, or Wardley, as he later chose his name to be. The most of the history that I know comes from my Aunt Elise Lee and Aunt Carrie Lee, because they were the older daughters, and they held the history for the family. In fact, we have written history that they actually wrote down before they died. What I know from the history and from the stories, because of course my great-granddad died before I was born, and so did my granddad. So all of the history that I know is handed down from the family. What I do understand is that my great-grandfather, Siliconji, at that particular time, was very young, and I know because I've looked up the dates of his death, his birth and his death. He was very young, and he was brought to this country 50 years after slavery, and he was already abolished, and he was brought over on the Wanderer, who was an illegal slave ship, and was brought to Jekyll Island. And from Jekyll Island, he came to Edgefield and lived in Senator Tillman's plantation. Now, from what my aunts tell me, he didn't do a lot of field work. What he actually did, because he was young, on the ship, he listened to a lot of the dialects and was able to discern and interpret dialects and speak to other Africans on the ship. And that's oh, thank you. I get, it's a real spiritual voyage for me when I think about it. But the Africans, the slaves would sing and talk to each other while they were chained on the ship. And that Ward Lee learned many of the languages and was able to communicate. So when he went to the Tillman plantation, his role was to work in the house with Mrs. Tillman and then to interpret when she wanted to speak to the other slaves out in the plantation or to ask them to do something. His role, from what I understand, was to do the interpreting. During this time, he also built a straw hut, and that hut was built with Romeo and Tucker. And what they did, when they did have time, their own time, was they took this hut to Columbia. And Columbia used to have a fair, and we still have a state fair in Columbia. And the purpose for going to Columbia was to try to glean monies to get back to Africa, which was his one goal, was to get back to Africa. And we do have a letter from Ward Lee that he actually wrote, and somebody interpreted for him. And we have it. It was logged in American Anthropology, Volume 10. So we actually do have that from Ward Lee. He never made it back to Africa. But one of the things he did was he encouraged his children and his grandchildren to travel. He encouraged so vicariously we travel. My great-granddad did write a letter, and at some point I'd love to read that letter because that's a great part of our history. And it has encouraged many of us to go back to Africa to see why he wanted to go. He encouraged his grandchildren to be educated and to be landowners. So he passed that down to us from slavery. We have actual proof of him voting in 1863, I believe it was. He's actually logged in Edgefield and voted. That encourages us to vote. It instilled us to vote in the last two elections. I believe that would have been a dream come true for him, to see all of us vote, including my mom who votes, and to see us elect a president into the United States. So his spirit still lives with us. And we still have a lot of the African pride in our family. My aunt, my oldest aunt, my mother's sister Carrie, embraced the Ethiopian religion. She dressed African all the time, never wore American clothes. So she really epitomized the African heritage that her grandfather had passed down to her. And we've lost a lot of that history because my aunts are no longer with us, but the oral history, whenever we sat down with them, all the talk was about the family history. They wouldn't really talk about anything else except the Lee family, how wonderful we are, how great we are, and how we came from slaves. And what a blessing that Woodley did come here. What a blessing that we have this history to share with our children and with our grandchildren, because without him being brought to this shore, to the shores of the United States, we wouldn't know anything about the history. We wouldn't be the family that we are today. So it's with great gratitude that I say thank you to everyone who's given us a part of our history, because everyone that gleams, I get so emotional, everyone that gleams into our life is giving us a little bit more self-esteem, a little bit more strength, and a little bit more pride, more family pride. In the land that my mother talked about in Bettis Academy, I remember seeing one particular piece of pottery, and it was on the floor. It was like a doorstop, I think. It was blue and white. I still can't see that pottery, but I remember it sitting there. And I was at the farm a lot. I lived with my Aunt Olise for a few years, so we were there every single day. She was our teacher at Mount Canaan School. So when we came home, all we did was talk about the family again and do our schoolwork. But I remember that piece of pottery always holding the door in the dining room, going out to the cornfields, which were in the front of the house. But I do not know what happened to it, and I can't see a face on it. The more I think about it, I see a handle on it, but I don't see a face. But I know that it was blue and white. I don't know if it was glazed or not, but I know that it was there. And I am not sure who made it, but I know it was handed down in our family. There was one thing about our aunts, my two aunts, Elise and Carrie. They held on to any piece of history that they thought their granddad or their father may have made. My aunt, Elise, as a matter of fact, she had a big chest in her porch, on her front porch, where she kept a lot of the items that the family history. We'd go over and I'd say, okay, Auntie, tell me about this. And she'd open up this big wooden chest and she'd pull out, different utensils. And she'd pull out blankets, which I have one that she made. And she would pull out books and old Bibles. She was the keeper of our history. And that Bible had everyone's birthday back to her great-granddad, everyone's date of death, anything that anyone may have done that was an achievement. She had all of the marriages. So we were able to, when we started doing family reunions in 1982, we created lifelines for the whole family. So now our family is aware of where we came from and our lifeline. So that's what our family has given to us. 1858, and that's when the Wanderer docked on Jekyll Island. And 2010 is when our family went back to Jekyll Island to do a family reunion. And actually, we gathered at the memorial that Jekyll Island has created for the Wanderer. And we held hands and we prayed. It was just awesome to be on that land. It's such a sacred field to just stand there. But my cousin Michael, who has the jug at this time, and he's the appropriate one to have the jug because Michael holds this history so close to his heart because of his grandmother. And Michael cries tears when you talk to him about this. But we had a picture of my great granddad, and Michael decided, because we were going back to Jekyll Island to embrace the land that our granddad came in on, that he would do a depiction of my granddad, and then in the belly of him is the Wanderer and slaves on the Wanderer ship. So it's Siliconji enslaved and Siliconji free. According to my Aunt Elise, who held this jug so close to her, that she said her granddad made this, and she held the history, and I believe that he made it. The face on it almost looks like him when I look at it. It's a very African face. It's the large nose, just looks so African. And she said that he made it, and he gave it to her dad, and then it was handed down to her. She held onto this jug until 1992, when Michael was married, and gave it to him in New York as a wedding gift. And he was just the appropriate one in the family to receive it, because Michael lived with her. He went to school with her. He went to college in Georgia. He was just the perfect one to receive this jug, and he holds it very dearly. Purpose, we do not know, and I definitely at this point do not know when it was made or when it was handed down to her. Purpose, I'm sure it's had several purposes since then, probably a little flower pot, a candle holder. I'm sure whoever had it used it for whatever purpose they thought. I could even see it being used as a little shaving, somebody shaving with it, because not everyone in the family held it in high esteem the way my aunt did. And what she did was she wrapped it and put it in that wooden case that she had all of the memorials and mementos in. But I'm sure not many of us thought of that as a face jug or the piece that would connect us. The only thing I have been told is that he did work in the pottery, and he did make items. I don't really know how many or what, or about the glazing or the color, but I know he actually made items. He made items around the farm. We had large bowls that he made that were handed down to the family. My mom talks about we had a wash basin, but we also had a bedpan that we used at night, and that had like kind of a large neck on it. And I do remember that, and I remember the family saying, be real careful because your grandfather made that. And it was always be careful because your grandfather made that. But I remember a pitcher, also a dipper that we used to use because we used to get water from the creek and the spring when we were on the farm. And I remember a dipper that we used to drink out of. And those are the things that I remember. A lot of straw baskets were around. There used to be a lot of pieces of broken pottery around the farm. Don't know what happened to them, but like little chips all around the farm, and we never really paid a lot of attention to them or knew at that particular time that they held our history. Now, my mother has the cane in New York at this particular time, and from what I understand, that cane was made by Woodley at an older age to enable him to get around still. And it's ornate, and that he made that for himself. My aunt talked a lot about Romeo and Tucker and Katie Noble. And in her oral history that is now written history that she's handed down to us, she mentions them by name. So I can't say for sure, but I would certainly believe that they all work together. The letter that I'd like to end with are the words of my great-grandfather, Silikanji Ward Lee, and his whole vision was to return to his homeland. And I'd like to read that, if I may. And the letter was written by Ward Lee, and it can be found in American Anthropology, Volume 10, pages 611 through 613. So it is documented. And this is Trenton, South Carolina, September 14th, 1904. And he wrote it to the public. It says, "To the public, please help me. In 1859, I was born to this country when I was a child. I cannot say just what age I was then, but I have been aroused by the Spirit, and I trust it was the Spirit of God, on last May. 1 year ago, it was revealed to me to go back to Africa, and I have been praying to know it was God's will, and the more I pray, the more it presses on me to, and now I am trying to get ready, if God be with me, to go back to Africa, soon as I can get off to go. And now I beg every one of you, please help me. I will be glad of whatever you will give me. I have been trying to make some arrangements to go ever since it was revealed to me to go. I am bound for my old home, if God be with me. White or black, yellow or red, I am an old African. Yours truly, Ward Lee."